The city hummed with a familiar, restless energy, a symphony of screeching tires, distant sirens, and the murmur of a million conversations all happening at once. Amidst this concrete jungle, the Grand Ethel stood like a monument to a different world. It was less a building and more a statement. Its gleaming glass and polished stone facade reflecting the sky in a way that made it seem untouchable. It was the kind of place people pointed at, but never dared to enter. A palace of gold and marble where the air itself probably tasted expensive. And on this bright, sunny Tuesday afternoon, it was about to receive a visitor it was entirely unprepared for. A yellow taxi, a bit weary from its life on the streets, pulled up to the hotel's sweeping canopied entrance. The driver, a man with a tired face and knowing eyes, watched in his rearview mirror as the young woman in the back seat gathered her things. She didn't look like his usual fare for this address. There were no crisp shopping bags from designer labels, no briefcase that screamed corporate power, just a small, worn leather backpack that looked like it had been on many adventures. He had picked her up just a few blocks away. From a simple apartment building that smelled of cooking spices and laundry detergent, she had been polite, her voice soft, and had simply said, "The Grand Ethel, please." Now, as the car slid to a stop, she leaned forward and handed him the fare, her fingers brushing his for a moment. "Thank you," she said, her smile genuine and warm. It was a smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners and making them sparkle. He nodded, a little taken aback by the simple kindness. "You'll have a good day now, miss." She pushed the door open and stepped out into the sunlight, blinking for a second as her eyes adjusted. Her name was Alina, and at 22, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with the clothes on her back or the money in her pocket. It was an inner peace, a comfort in her own skin that was rare in a city that constantly demanded you be someone else. Her beauty was not the sharp, polished kind you see on magazine covers. It was softer, more natural. Her hair, the color of rich honey, was pulled back into a simple ponytail that swayed as she moved. And a few stray strands framed a face with clear, intelligent eyes and a dusting of freckles across her nose. She wore a pair of comfortable, faded jeans that hugged her slender frame, a soft, oatmeal-colored sweater that looked like it had been washed 100 times, and a pair of clean, well-loved white sneakers. To her, this was an outfit for a pleasant day out. To the world she was about to step into, it was a costume of poverty. The doorman. A man named Arthur, who had been at his post for 15 years, was a master of the silent assessment. His job was to be a gatekeeper, a human filter of who belonged and who did not. He saw everything in a split second: the quality of the shoes, the weight of the watch, the cut of the cloth. He saw Alina approach, and his internal calculator whirred to life. The sneakers were the first red flag. The backpack was the second. The lack of any visible jewelry was the third. His face, usually a mask of professional neutrality, tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't offer a welcoming smile. He didn't move to open the second heavier door for her. He simply stood, a statue in a tailored uniform, and watched her walk past him, his gaze lingering on her back for a moment too long before. He turned his attention to a gleaming black sedan that was pulling up behind her taxi. In his world, she was already forgotten, a fleeting anomaly. Alina, however, was completely oblivious to this silent judgment. Her mind was elsewhere, filled with thoughts of her husband, Liam. He had been working so hard lately, spending long hours at the hotel he had poured his heart and soul into. He had bought the Grand Ethel not just as a business venture, but as a dream, a place to create experiences and memories for people. He often spoke about it with a passion that made her eyes light up, describing the curve of the staircase in the lobby, the way the light hit the chandeliers at dusk, and the breathtaking view from the rooftop garden. "You have to see it, Lynn," he would tell her, his voice full of excitement. "It's not just a building, it's a feeling. I want you to feel it too." Today was the day. She had a few hours free between her classes at the community college, where she was studying art history, and she had decided to surprise him. She knew he was in a back-to-back string of meetings, so she hadn't called. She just wanted to go, to see the place he loved so much, maybe have a quiet lunch by herself in that famous garden he always raved about. She wanted to connect with his world, to understand the magic he saw in it. She pushed through the heavy glass door, her small backpack slung over one shoulder, stepped into another universe. The change was instantaneous. The chaotic noise of the city was muffled to a distant hum, replaced by a profound, almost reverent silence. The air inside was cool and carried a faint floral scent she couldn't quite place, something expensive and clean. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight before her. The lobby was a cathedral of luxury. The floor was a vast expanse of white and gray marble, so polished it reflected the towering ceiling like a still lake. In the center of it all hung a colossal chandelier, a waterfall of glittering crystal that seemed to float in the air, casting a soft golden light on everything below. Plush, velvet armchairs in deep jewel tones were arranged in intimate groupings, as if inviting whispered secrets. It was beautiful, awe-inspiring, and deeply intimidating. Her sneakers, which had felt so comfortable on the city pavement, now seemed to make a loud, squeaking sound with every step she took on the pristine marble. It was a sound that didn't belong here. She felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of being an imposter. She was a drop of water in a pool of oil. She saw women in elegant dresses, their hair perfectly coiffed, laughing softly as they sipped from delicate china cups. She saw men in sharp suits, their faces serious as they spoke into their phones, their leather shoes making no sound at all on the floor. Everyone moved with a certain grace, a certain purpose, as if they had been born into this world of quiet opulence. And then there was her, in her jeans and sweater, feeling like a child who had wandered into a grown-up party by mistake. A wave of self-consciousness washed over her. She pulled at the hem of her sweater, suddenly wishing she had worn something else, anything else. But she pushed the feeling down, taking a deep breath. She was Liam's wife. This place, as intimidating as it was a part of him. She had a right to be here. She squared her shoulders and walked towards the long, sweeping reception desk, her eyes fixed on the man standing behind it. The reception desk was more like a throne room. It was a massive, curved structure of dark, gleaming wood, polished to a mirror shine. Behind it, a wall of backlit glass panels displayed the hotel's name in elegant golden lettering. And standing in the center of it all was the man who was the gatekeeper to this inner sanctum. He was the head of guest relations. It's a man in his late 40s with slicked-back silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His name was Mr. Dubois, and he had perfected the art of looking through people. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie that was knotted with mathematical precision. He moved with an air of absolute authority, his posture rigid, his expression a carefully constructed mask of polite disdain. As Elena approached, he was speaking to a couple in their 50s, his voice a low, soothing purr. He handed them a key card with 2 hands, a gesture of deep respect, and bowed his head slightly. "It is our pleasure to have you with us, Mr. and Mrs. Chen. I hope your stay is nothing short of perfection." The couple beamed, clearly charmed, and walked away towards the elevators. Mr. Dubois then turned his attention to Elena. His eyes, a cold, pale blue, did a quick, ruthless scan of her from head to toe. They lingered for a fraction of a second on her sneakers, then on her backpack, before settling on her face. The moment he saw her simple makeup-free face and her earnest, hopeful eyes, his own expression hardened. The professional smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter dismissal. It was a look that said, "You have made a mistake. You do not belong here, and I am going to enjoy making you leave." Elena, still trying to project an air of calm confidence, reached the desk and offered him a small, friendly smile. "Hi," she began, her voice a little softer than she intended. "I was wondering if you might have a table available for one in the rooftop restaurant." Mr. Dubois didn't even glance at his computer screen. He didn't pick up a phone. He didn't need to. He had already made his decision. He leaned forward slightly, placing his hands flat on the polished wood in front of him, a gesture that was both casual and commanding. He looked at her not as a potential guest, but as an inconvenience. A bug that had somehow found its way into his pristine kitchen, the rooftop restaurant, He repeated, his voice laced with a thin, syrupy condescension that was far more insulting than outright anger. "I am afraid, madam, that the restaurant is exceptionally exclusive. It is, as you might imagine, fully booked for the foreseeable future. We only accept reservations from our hotel guests and our most valued members." He paused, letting his words sink in. He was enjoying this. He enjoyed the power he held in this moment, the ability to crush someone's hopes with a few carefully chosen words. He could see the flicker of disappointment in her eyes, and it fueled him. He wasn't finished. He leaned in a little closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper as if he were sharing a great secret. "Perhaps," he said, his tone dripping with false sympathy, "you might find a dining establishment more suitable to your needs. A few blocks from here, there are several lovely cafes that are far more casual." The word casual hung in the air between them, a clear and brutal insult. He was not just rejecting her request. He was rejecting her. He was telling her that she was not good enough, not rich enough, not polished enough to even breathe the air in this place. He was telling her to go back to where she came from. Alina stood there, stunned into silence for a moment. The warmth she had felt from the taxi driver's kindness, the excitement she had felt about seeing Liam's world, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping shame. She felt her cheeks begin to burn. She could feel the eyes of other staff members on her, could sense the judgment in the air. She had been so naive. She had thought she could just walk in and be a part of this, but she was wrong. She was an outsider, and they had just made it painfully clear. A flash of anger, hot and sharp, shot through her. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell him who she was, that her husband owned this whole gilded palace, that he was just a salaried employee who would be on the street tomorrow if Liam so desired. But the thought was fleeting. It wasn't her way. Liam always said that true power was not in lording it over people, but in treating everyone with dignity. And she would not let this man rob her of her own, so she took a deep breath, and the anger subsided, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. The shame began to fade, replaced by a profound sense of pity for the man in front of her. For his smallness, his need to feel big by making others feel small. Her expression changed. The hurt in her eyes was replaced by a calm, clear light. She looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of sad understanding. "I see," she said, her voice now steady and clear, no longer soft. "Thank you for your time." The words were simple, polite, but they carried a weight that Mr. Dubois was not expecting. It was not the reaction of a defeated, humiliated girl. It was the response of someone who was in complete control of the situation. He was taken aback for a second, his practiced mask slipping for just a moment, as Alina turned to walk away. She caught the eye of a young woman at the end of the reception desk, a junior receptionist who had been watching the entire exchange. The young woman's face was a mixture of shock and embarrassment, her eyes wide with apology. Alina gave her a small, almost imperceptible shrug, a little tilt of her head that said, "It's okay. I'm all right." It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated grace. She then turned and walked away from the desk, her back straight, her head held high. She didn't scurry away in shame. She didn't look back. She walked with the same quiet dignity she had walked in with, if not more so. The squeak of her sneakers on the marble floor was no longer a sound of embarrassment, but a rhythm of her own self-respect. The staff watched her go, their faces a mixture of surprise and confusion. They had expected tears, a scene, something, but they got nothing but her quiet retreat. In their minds, however, their judgment was confirmed. She had left. She clearly didn't belong. Alina pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped back out into the noisy, chaotic sunlight of the city. The air, filled with exhaust fumes and the sounds of life, had never felt so refreshing. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs, and the last of the stuffy, judgmental air of the Grand Ethel was expelled. She was alone again, but she was not lonely. She was just a young woman in a comfortable sweater, standing on a busy street corner, with a story to tell her husband when he got home. And she knew with absolute certainty that it was a story he would want to hear. Asterisk. The cool air of the lobby did little to soothe the fire of indignation that had flared in Mr. Dubois's chest. He watched the young woman's retreating back, a mixture of triumph and annoyance warring within him. Triumph, because he had done his job. He had protected the sanctuary of the Grand Ethel from an unsightly intrusion. Annoyance, because she had not reacted as he had expected. There had been no tears, no pleading, no angry outburst. Just that quiet, infuriating dignity. It was as if she had looked right through his polished armor and seen the small, insecure man inside. He straightened his tie, a habitual gesture meant to restore his sense of control, and turned his attention back to his kingdom, determined to erase the brief, unpleasant encounter from his mind. He plastered his professional, unctuous smile back on his face as a new guest approached. A portly man in a suit that strained at the buttons. But Mr. Dubois's mind was elsewhere. He found himself replaying the scene, analyzing the girl's every move, the way she had stood, the way she had spoken, the look in her eyes. It was a look of calm, not of defeat. It bothered him. People like her were supposed to scurry away with their tails between their legs. They were supposed to learn their place. She had acted as if she were the one in control. His gaze drifted across the lobby, past the gilded pillars and the cascading floral arrangements, and landed on the junior receptionist, a young woman named Anya, who had been with the hotel for only a few months. Anya was quickly looking down at her keyboard, her cheeks flushed. But Mr. Dubois had seen the look she had exchanged with the girl. It was a look of sympathy, a look of solidarity. This would not do. It was a crack in the facade, a chink in the armor of impeccable service he demanded from his staff. He made a mental note to have a word with her later about professional detachment. He decided a walk was in order, a patrol of his domain. He needed to remind himself of the perfection he presided over, to wash away the grime of the encounter. He stepped out from behind the reception desk, his shoes making no sound on the marble, a stark contrast to the girl's squeaking sneakers. He moved with a practiced, predatory grace, his eyes scanning everything, missing nothing. He inspected the arrangement of fresh lilies on a side table, subtly nudging one stem into a more pleasing angle. He noted a microscopic scuff on the base of a marble statue and made a silent note to have it buffed out immediately. He was the guardian of this temple, and his standards were absolute as he walked. He couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation from the guests lounging in the velvet armchairs. They spoke of art auctions, of private jets, of business deals worth millions. This was the world he understood, the world he belonged to, a world of order, of class, of clear boundaries. That girl, with her simple clothes and her unadorned face, she was a blur, an anomaly that threatened to smudge the clean lines of his world. He felt a surge of justification. He had done the right thing. He had protected the integrity of the hotel. The Grand Ethel was not a public park. It was an exclusive club, and he was its bouncer. He found himself drifting towards the grand staircase that led to the upper floors and eventually the rooftop restaurant, the scene of the would-be crime. He stood at the bottom of the sweeping, carpeted stairs, looking up. He imagined her up there, in her worn jeans, sitting amongst the elegantly dressed patrons, a discordant note in a perfect symphony. The thought was physically repulsive to him. It was like imagining a weed growing in a perfectly manicured garden. "Everything all right, Mr. Dubois?" The voice came from a passing bellman, a young man named Kevin, who was always eager to please. Mr. Dubois turned his cold eyes on him. "Everything is perfectly fine, Kevin. Simply ensuring our standards are being maintained." The word standards hung in the air, a clear warning. Kevin nodded quickly and hurried on his way. Mr. Dubois continued his patrol, his mind churning. He was a man who believed in systems and hierarchies. He had worked his way up from a lowly position at a much lesser hotel, through sheer force of will and an unwavering commitment to the principles of luxury. He had learned that the key to success was not just in providing service, but in providing an experience. And an experience depended on atmosphere. An atmosphere, he knew, was a fragile thing. It could be shattered by a single inappropriate element. A loud noise, a misplaced object, a girl in a backpack. He thought about the owner, Mr. Sterling, a young man. but one who understood the value of what he had built. He had entrusted Mr. Dubois with the soul of the hotel, its public face. Mr. Dubois felt a swell of pride. He was the protector of Mr. Sterling's vision. He was sure that if his boss knew about the incident, he would have approved. Mr. Sterling was a man of taste, of distinction. He would never have wanted his exclusive restaurant to be sullied by someone so common. The thought of Mr. Sterling brought a new level of conviction to his actions. He wasn't just doing this for himself or for the hotel. He was doing it for the owner. He was a loyal soldier, defending the fort. The girl's quiet dignity suddenly seemed less like a personal affront and more like a challenge to the very system he served. It was an act of rebellion, and he had quashed it. He felt a sense of satisfaction settle over him, warm and comforting. He had done his duty. He turned and began to walk back towards the reception desk, his step lighter, his shoulders more relaxed. The lobby seemed to shine a little brighter, the air to smell a little sweeter. Order had been restored. As he approached his station, he saw Anya, the receptionist, speaking in hushed tones to the concierge. They both fell silent as he drew near. Anya looked down at her screen, her face pale. Mr. Dubois stood behind his desk, the polished wood, a familiar comfort. He looked out over the lobby, at the rich and the beautiful, the powerful and the important. They were his people. This was his world, and he would do whatever it took to keep it that way. The memory of the girl in the simple sweater was already fading, becoming just a minor, unpleasant footnote in another perfect day at the Grand Ethel. He had one. He was sure of it. He picked up a pen and began to review the guest list for the evening, his mind already moving on to the next task. Secure in the knowledge that he had successfully protected his kingdom from the outside world? Asterisk. The heavy glass door swung shut behind her, and with it the silent, perfumed world of the Grand Ethel was sealed away. The city noise rushed back in, a chaotic wave of sound and life that felt like a breath of fresh air after being underwater. The sun, which had seemed merely bright from inside the lobby, now felt warm and real on her skin. Alina stood on the pavement for a long moment, just breathing. She let the rumble of a passing bus vibrate through the soles of her sneakers. A grounding sensation that connected her back to the real world. The sting of the man's words was still there, a sharp little splinter in her heart. But it was already beginning to dull, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. She didn't move immediately. She just watched the city. A courier on a bicycle weaved through traffic with a frantic urgency. A woman laughed into her phone, her head thrown back. A street musician began to tune his guitar a few yards away, the sound of plucked strings a hopeful, searching melody. This was the world she understood, a world of motion and imperfection, of genuine smiles and hurried lives. It was messy and unpredictable, and beautifully, unapologetically human. The Grand Ethel, with its cold marble and colder smiles, felt like a museum. A place where life was preserved behind glass, not lived. She started walking with no particular destination in mind. She just needed to move, to process what had happened. The humiliation had been real, a hot flush that had crept up her neck and made her want to disappear. But underneath that, there was something else. A profound sense of disappointment, not in herself, but in them. In the man with the granite face and the pitying voice, in the system that allowed a person's worth to be measured by the clothes on their back. Liam had told her so much about his dream for the hotel, about creating a place of warmth and welcome, a sanctuary from the world. She had seen a glimpse of that world, and it was not a sanctuary. It was a fortress, and she had been firmly rebuffed at the gates. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a gentle vibration against her thigh. She pulled it out, expecting to see a text from Liam asking how her lunch was. The screen lit up with his name, and a wave of affection washed over her, chasing away the last of the chill from the hotel. But her heart sank a little. How could she tell him what happened? She didn't want to sound like she was complaining, or worse, like she was trying to get someone in trouble. She knew how much he trusted his staff, how much pride he took in the hotel's reputation for impeccable service. Telling him that his own head of guest relations had treated his wife like a piece of trash felt like it would be a blow not just to the man, but to the dream. She let the call go to voicemail. A moment later, a text appeared. "Hey you. Just finished a killer meeting. Hope you're enjoying the view. Let me know when you're heading home. Love you." Reading his words so full of excitement and love made her chest ache. She imagined him up there in one of those high-level offices, looking out at the same city she was now walking through, seeing it from a completely different perspective. He saw potential and opportunity. She had just been reminded that some people only saw obstacles and inconveniences. She typed back a quick reply, her fingers moving slowly. "Hey, the view from the street is pretty great too. Just doing a bit of exploring. Talk soon. Love you more?" So it wasn't a lie, not really. She was exploring, just not in the way she had planned. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and kept walking. The initial urge to flee had subsided, replaced by a need to understand. Why did it bother her so much? It was just one rude man in a city of millions. But it wasn't just that. It was the casualness of his cruelty, the effortless way he had sliced her down with a few choice words. It was the assumption that he had the right to judge her, to decide her place in the world. It was a feeling she knew, but one she hadn't experienced so starkly in a long time. Growing up, her family hadn't had much. They'd always had enough, but there were no fancy vacations or designer clothes. She remembered the feeling of being the only kid in her class without the new brand-name sneakers. The quiet shame of not being able to afford the school trip. She had worked hard to move past that, to build a life where her value was defined by her character, not her bank account. But in the lobby of the Grand Ethel, she had been made to feel like that little girl all over again. She found herself walking towards a small park she knew, a green oasis tucked between two busy streets. It wasn't much, just a few patches of grass, some tired-looking flower beds, and a scattering of wooden benches. But it was alive. She saw an old man feeding pigeons from a paper bag, a group of children chasing each other around a fountain, their shrieks of laughter echoing through the trees. She found an empty bench and sat down, pulling her knees up to her chest and wrapping her arms around them. The worn leather of her backpack felt solid and reassuring against her back. She watched the people in the park. A young couple sat on a blanket, sharing a sandwich and talking in low voices, their heads close together. A woman in a nurse's uniform sat on another bench, her eyes closed, her face etched with exhaustion. A teenager with headphones skated by, lost in his own world. They were all so different, all living their own separate, complicated lives. And yet they all shared this small space, this moment of peace in the middle of the chaos. There was no judgment here, no one checking to see if your clothes were expensive enough or if you belonged. You just belonged by virtue of being there. This was a true sanctuary. It wasn't made of marble and gold, but of grass and sunlight and shared humanity. She thought about the look on the young receptionist's face, the mixture of pity and embarrassment. It was a look that said, "I'm sorry this is happening, but I'm powerless to stop it." Alina felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was probably young, new to the job, trying to navigate the complex, cutthroat world of luxury hospitality. She had probably been taught that Mr. Dubois's way was the right way, that protecting the hotel's image meant keeping certain people out. Alina wished she had said something to her, something encouraging. But in that moment, she had been too focused on holding her own head up. A small, scruffy terrier trotted over to her, its tail wagging tentatively. It sniffed at her sneaker, then looked up at her with big brown eyes. Alina smiled, a real, genuine smile this time. She reached down and scratched the dog behind its ears. "Well, hello there," she whispered. "You don't care what I'm wearing, do you?" The dog leaned into her hand, its tail thumping against the bench. Its owner, a man in a worn-out t-shirt and jeans, called out, "Sorry, hope he's not bothering you." Alina looked up and shook her head. "Not at all. He's perfect." The man smiled and walked over. "He's got a good sense of character," he said, his voice kind. "He only likes the good people." Alina felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was a small, simple interaction, but it felt like a healing balm on the raw wound from the hotel. The man and his dog moved on, and Alina was left alone with her thoughts again. She was starting to see the situation differently. It wasn't just about her. It was about a system, A system that Mr. Dubois was a product of, but not the entirety of. Liam wanted to change that system. He wanted the Grand Ethel to be a place where everyone felt welcome, a place where character was valued over appearance. But he couldn't do it alone, and his vision was clearly not being communicated, or perhaps not being embraced, by everyone on his staff. This wasn't about getting Mr. Dubois fired. That would be too simple, too easy. It wouldn't solve the underlying problem. The problem was the mindset, the culture of exclusion that he represented. If she just told Liam and he fired the man, someone else would just take his place, someone with the same ingrained prejudices. The change had to be deeper. It had to be cultural, and then she knew what she had to do. She couldn't just go home and tell Liam the story and let him handle it. That would be hiding behind him, letting him fight her battles. She was his partner, not just his wife. His dream was her dream, and she had just been given a first-hand look at one of its biggest flaws. She couldn't unsee it. She had a responsibility, not just to herself, but to him, and to the future of the hotel he loved so much. She stood up from the bench, feeling a new sense of purpose. The hurt and the humiliation were still there, but they were no longer the dominant emotions. They had been transformed into something else. Resolve. She was no longer a victim of a rude man. She was a witness, and she had a story to tell. But it wasn't a story of complaint. It was a story of opportunity. An opportunity to make things better. She pulled out her phone again and stared at Liam's text. She took a deep breath and began to type, her fingers moving with a newfound certainty. "Hey, so, I have a story for you when you get home. It's not a bad story, I promise. But it's an important one. It's about your hotel. And I think it's something we need to talk about. See you tonight." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. A weight lifted off her shoulders. She had been honest, but she hadn't been accusatory. She had framed it as a we problem, a shared challenge. Because that's what they were, a team. She put her phone away and started walking home. The city no longer seemed like a chaotic escape from the hotel. It seemed like the source of the hotel's potential. The people on the streets, the people in the park, they were the ones who should feel welcome in a place like the Grand Ethel. Not just the ones who could afford it, but the ones who could appreciate it. The ones who had character. The ones who were good people, like the man in the park had said. She was no longer just the beautiful girl in the ordinary clothes. She was Alina, the wife of the owner, a woman with a voice and a plan. And she was ready to go home and share it with the man she loved. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city streets when the sleek black sedan pulled up to the Grand Ethel. It was a car that commanded respect, its dark paint job gleaming under the city lights. Its windows tinted just enough to promise privacy without seeming standoffish. It was the kind of car that belonged here. The doorman, Arthur, who had earlier dismissed Alina with a cursory glance, now snapped to attention, his back straightening, his white-gloved hands moving to open the rear door with practiced reverence. This was a language he understood fluently. The door swung open, and out stepped Liam. He was in his early 30s, with a kind face that held a certain intensity, especially around his eyes. He wore a sharp, well-tailored suit, but it was a simple, dark gray, paired with a crisp white shirt and no tie. The collar was open, a subtle nod to his own more relaxed style, small rebellion against the stuffiness he often fought against in his own industry. He moved with an easy confidence, a man who was comfortable in his own skin and, by extension, in any room he chose to enter. He wasn't just the owner. He was the creator, the visionary, who had poured his own fortune and soul into resurrecting this old landmark and giving it a new heartbeat. As he walked through the revolving doors, the atmosphere in the lobby shifted instantly. It was as if a low-voltage current had been switched on. The gentle hum of conversation quieted for a beat. Staff members, who had been relaxing for a moment, straightened their postures. A housekeeper polishing a brass railing suddenly found a fascinating spot on the metal that required immediate attention. Liam was not a tyrant. He was rarely loud and never angry, but his presence was a constant, quiet reminder of the standard he expected. He had an eye for detail, and an uncanny ability to sense the mood of a room. He was the living embodiment of the hotel's soul, and everyone felt it. Mr. Dubois, having completed his patrol and restored his sense of order, was back behind his command post at the reception desk. He saw Liam enter, and a transformation took place. The cold, granite-like mask of condescension melted away, replaced by a warm, beaming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was the smile of a courtier greeting his king, a performance of such sycophantic perfection that it was almost an art form. He glided out from behind the desk, his hands clasped in front of him, his body language a study in deference. "What an honor, sir." "We weren't expecting you today," he said, his voice a smooth, low purr of approval. "It is always a pleasure to have you grace us with your presence." Liam offered a small, distracted smile, his eyes already scanning the lobby, a flicker of concern on his face. He wasn't looking at the marble or the chandeliers. He was looking for a person. "Thank you, Dubois. Just finished up downtown and thought I'd swing by." He took another step forward, his gaze sweeping past the velvet armchairs and towards the bank of elevators. He was looking for the familiar, comforting sight of his wife, Mr. Dubois. Oblivious to the reason for Liam's distraction, mistook it for a general inspection. "Everything is in perfect order, I assure you, sir. We have the Chen party arriving this evening, and the preparations for the gala on Saturday are proceeding flawlessly." He was eager to report his successes, to bathe in the approval of his boss, but Liam wasn't listening. He turned his full attention to the head of guest relations, the friendly distraction in his eyes now replaced by a focused, direct question. "Where's my wife?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of urgency that made Mr. Dubois pause. "She was meeting me here for lunch." The question hung in the air, a sudden, unexpected jolt in the perfectly orchestrated symphony of the lobby. Mr. Dubois's professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His mind raced, trying to connect the dots. "Your wife, sir?" he repeated, a hint of confusion in his voice. Liam's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. He wasn't a man who enjoyed repeating himself. "Alina, 22 years old, beautiful, probably wearing jeans and a sweater. She texted me that she was here an hour ago," as Liam described her. The pieces began to click into place in Mr. Dubois's mind with the horrifying speed of a car crash. 22, beautiful jeans, a sweater, the backpack, the quiet, unadorned face. The girl he had so confidently, so cruelly turned away. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pale, pasty white. The beaming smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was a fish out of water, gasping for air, in a world that had just been turned upside down. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that makes every sound seem impossibly loud, the distant ding of an elevator, the rustle of a newspaper, the frantic beating of Mr. Dubois's own heart. He could feel Liam's eyes on him, no longer just searching but now questioning, demanding an answer from the end of the long reception desk. A young woman who had been trying to make herself invisible took a hesitant step forward. It was Anya, the junior receptionist. She had witnessed the entire exchange, had felt the sting of Mr. Dubois's words, as if they had been directed at her. She saw the look of dawning horror on his face and knew with absolute certainty that he was talking about the same woman. Her own heart was pounding, a mixture of fear and a strange, defiant sense of justice. She couldn't let him lie. She couldn't let him weasel his way out of this. Taking a deep breath, she spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "Sir," she said, directing her words to Liam, unable to meet Mr. Dubois's venomous glare. "Mr. Dubois." He told her the restaurant was full. He told her she wasn't welcome here. The words landed in the silent lobby like a verdict. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Anya had spoken the simple, unvarnished truth. Mr. Dubois shot her a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, a look that promised retribution, but it was too late. The damage was done. Liam's gaze shifted from the terrified face of Mr. Dubois to the brave, resolute face of the young receptionist. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, a silent thank you. Then he turned back to the man he had entrusted with the public face of his hotel, his dream. The calm in his voice was gone, replaced by a quiet, icy fury that was far more terrifying than any shout could ever be. "You looked at my wife," he said, his voice dangerously low, each word chosen with precision. "And you decided she wasn't good enough for my hotel. You judged her by her clothes, not by her character. That is the exact opposite of everything this establishment is supposed to stand for." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He wasn't just an angry boss. He was a betrayed partner. This wasn't just a business mistake. It was a personal insult. "You're fired," he said, his voice flat and final. "Effective immediately. Pack your things." T didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet finality of his statement was more powerful than any outburst. It was the sound of a door closing permanently. Mr. Dubois stood frozen, his mouth agape, his face a mask of disbelief and humiliation. He, the great arbiter of who belonged and who did not, had just been cast out. Liam didn't look at him again. He turned his full attention to Anya, who looked like she might faint. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone now gentle. "Anya, sir," she whispered. "Anya," he said, his voice kind but firm. "Find Alina. Use her phone number from our reservation system. Call her and bring her back here. Tell her I'm waiting." He paused, then added, "And from now on, you're in charge of training the staff on what true hospitality looks like. We'll talk more tomorrow." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He walked towards the grand staircase, pulling out his own phone as he went. He needed to call his wife himself. He needed to hear her voice. The rest of it, the fallout, the restructuring, it could wait. Right now, all that mattered was finding the woman he loved. The woman whose simple beauty and quiet dignity had just revealed a rot at the core of his dream. And bringing her back where she belonged. Asterisk, the silence that followed Liam's departure was a living, breathing thing. It was heavy and thick, pressing down on everyone in the grand lobby. A stark contrast to the usual hushed elegance. Mr. Dubois stood frozen, his face a sickly shade of gray. The carefully constructed mask of authority shattered into a million pieces at his feet. The power he had wielded so effortlessly just moments ago had evaporated, leaving him exposed, small, and utterly humiliated. He looked around, his eyes pleading for an ally, but found none. The other staff members who had once looked to him for cues now stared at the floor, the walls, anywhere but at the fallen king. He was a ghost in his own kingdom, already invisible. Anya, the junior receptionist, stood trembling behind the desk, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt a dizzying mix of terror and elation. She had spoken up. She had told the truth. And now, the man who had been the source of her daily anxiety was gone. But in his place was a new, terrifying weight, the responsibility that had just been placed on her young shoulders. In charge of training, Mr. Sterling had said. The words echoed in her mind, a daunting and electrifying promise. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she did as she was told. Her fingers fumbled slightly as she navigated the hotel's reservation system, but she found the number. With another deep breath, she dialed, her hand trembling so much she almost dropped the phone. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Alina was walking home, the city's rhythm, a comforting pulse beneath her feet. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't expected. The confrontation had been awful, but the clarity that followed was a gift. She knew what she had to do, and she knew Liam would listen. That was the foundation of their relationship. Not just love, but a deep, unwavering partnership. She was just about to turn onto her street when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She smiled, thinking it was Liam calling to say he was on his way home. She pulled it out, but the number was unfamiliar. She answered with a hesitant, "Hello? Hello, is this Alina?" The voice on the other end was young and sounded nervous. "Yes, this is she." "Who is this?" "My name is Anya. I'm a receptionist at the Grand Ethel." Alina's heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Sterling. Liam. He asked me to call you. He's here. He's waiting for you in the lobby." Alina stopped walking, the sounds of the city fading into a distant hum. "He's there?" Is everything okay? There was a pause on the other end, and when Anya spoke again, her voice was softer, almost apologetic. I think it's better if you just come back, ma'am. Please. The urgency in the girl's voice sent a ripple of unease through Alina. This wasn't just Liam finishing a meeting early. Something had happened. Okay, she said, her voice firm. I'm on my way. She hung up and immediately hailed a passing taxi. Her mind racing through a dozen possibilities. When she stepped back into the lobby of the Grand Ethel for the second time that day, the atmosphere was completely different. The air was no longer filled with a silent judgment, but with a palpable tension. The staff who had been so dismissive before now looked at her with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and deference. She saw Mr. Dubois standing near the elevators, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of defeat as he clutched a small cardboard box containing his personal belongings. Their eyes met for a brief second. There was no anger in her gaze, only a quiet, final pity. He quickly looked away, shamed, and then she saw Liam. He was standing by the grand staircase. And the moment he saw her, his entire face softened. The hard, focused look he had worn while dealing with Mr. Dubois vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated love and concern. He closed the distance between them in a few long strides and pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair. For a moment he just held her, saying nothing. She could feel the tension in his body, the rapid beat of his heart. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry, Alina. She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her hand gently cupping his cheek. You have nothing to be sorry for, she said softly. You didn't do anything wrong? I did, he insisted, his eyes searching hers. I built a place where this could happen. I created a culture where a man like that felt he had the power to treat you that way. That's on me. No, she said, her voice steady. That's on him. And it's on the system that let him think it was okay. But that's not the system you wanted, Liam. And that's not the system we're going to have. He looked at her, truly seeing her strength, her resilience, her unwavering grace. He saw not a victim, but his partner. He nodded slowly, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. We, he repeated. I like the sound of that. Took her hand and led her not towards the exit, but towards the rooftop restaurant. As they walked, the staff they passed stopped what they were doing and watched. Anya gave Alina a small, hopeful smile, which Alina returned with a warm, encouraging nod. This was no longer just their private moment. It was a statement, the mater dei, at the rooftop restaurant. A man who had witnessed the earlier dismissal from a distance now rushed forward, his face a picture of remorse. Mr. Sterling, Ms. Alina, he stammered. I am so terribly sorry about what happened earlier. Please, let me get you the best table in the house. Liam looked at the man, then at Alina. What do you think, love? Is the view from here worth it? Alina looked around. The restaurant was beautiful, just as Liam had described. The view of the city as the sun began to set was breathtaking. But it was the atmosphere that had changed. The air was no longer heavy with exclusivity, but charged with a new, hopeful energy. Yes, she said, her smile genuine. I think it is. They were seated at a secluded table with a panoramic view of the skyline. For a few minutes, they just sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to a deep, dusky purple. Finally, Liam broke the silence. Tell me everything, he said gently. So she did. She told him about her walk, about the park, about the little terrier, about her decision not to be angry but to see it as an opportunity. She didn't just recount the events. She shared her feelings, her thoughts, her realizations. She spoke not as a wronged wife, but as a thoughtful partner, offering a diagnosis of a problem she had seen up close. Liam listened intently, not interrupting once. When she finished, he reached across the table and took her hand. You're incredible, he said. I was ready to just fire him and move on, to pretend it was an isolated incident. But you're right. It's not about one person. It's about the soul of this place. And you just saved it. He looked out at the view, his mind already working. I've been so focused on the big picture, the finances, the marketing, the design, I forgot about the most important thing, the feeling. The human connection. I trusted people to maintain my values without ever really making sure they understood them. Then start now, Alina said simply. Talk to them. Not as their boss, but as their partner. Tell them what you want this place to be. He nodded, a new fire in his eyes. I will, first thing tomorrow. And I'm going to start by promoting Anya. She has more character and courage in her little finger than Mr. Dubois had in his entire body. They sat there for a long time, talking, planning, dreaming together. The waiter brought them food, but they barely touched it, lost in their shared vision. They talked about creating training programs focused on empathy, about hiring for character over experience, about turning the Grand Ethel into a place that was truly welcoming to everyone. From the CEO in the penthouse to the tourist in jeans who just wanted to see the view, as they finally left the restaurant and walked back through the lobby, the atmosphere had shifted again. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet buzz of anticipation. The staff looked at Alina, not with pity or deference, but with respect. She wasn't just the owner's wife anymore. She was the woman who had faced down the dragon and shown them all a better way. When they stepped outside into the cool night air, the city lights twinkled like a million scattered diamonds. Liam hailed a taxi, and as they slid into the back seat, he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. You know, he said, his voice a low rumble, I always knew you were beautiful. But today I saw how truly powerful you are. Lena leaned her head against his shoulder, a feeling of deep contentment washing over her. The day had started with humiliation and rejection, but it was ending with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper love for the man beside her. She had gone to the hotel to see his world, and in doing so, she had ended up changing it for the better. The Grand Ethel was still a palace of marble and gold, but tonight, for the first time, it felt like it might just be on its way to becoming a real home. And she was, and always would be, its heart.